thought we'd talk a little bit about the concept of 2.5 hives, and we can talk about what might be involved. I've changer here. I'll be all set there. Here's okay. Many of you recognize this face. Been around California for an awful long time. He preceded me at Cornell. In his new book, Honeybee Hobbyist, he does talk about urban environmentalists should limit their hives to 2. Well, we're going to talk about adding the concept of adding another half to that 2. It doesn't have to be 2. There are some advantages in 2 and then advantages in the other half. I'll start with a question. What does your apiary look like? Many of the members have a colony or a single colony. It may be on a roof. That colony may be a non-traditional colony, such as a wary hive rather than a Langstroth, a movable frame colony. It may be a top bar hive. There are a few other configurations. And some people are finding that the longitudinal hive of various configurations of some use today. So I'm not sure what your apiary looks like or where you cite that apiary. We're going to talk about 2 hives and some of the advantages of 2 hives in an apiary. So I don't know if your apiary looks a little bit like this. A winter hive, which in some places in the foothills, of course, will see the snow. Talking with Randy the other day, and it was snowing furiously up there in Nevada County. Or what kind of configuration you may have for your colony, whether you work the half depths of 8 or 10 frames. So we're seeing half depths here with a feeder box up on top, a super being left, or standards and mixed with half depths feeders then on top. So a 2 hive, a single hive or 2 hive apiary. I run a Pacific Northwest survey, and we've just started gathering data. And there are many people throughout our region that have 1, 2, or 2 hives, or under 9 colonies. I don't know, as you prepare bees for the fall, if they're going to look like these. Here are a couple of condos. So the 4 colony, you've got a single box hive with a reduced entrance, and then 2 nuke boxes on top of it, these 2 red boxes, and then our insulation at the top. And in the back, we've got a single hive body overwintering, 2 nuke boxes, a double screen, and another box of bees up on top. So beehive condos, certainly more than 2 in this case, 3, and then also overwintering 4 nukes. So just a different type of configuration to try to go through winter with. Okay. The concept that Norm's talking about, 2 hives, about others as well, rather than a single hive, is that for the new or the established beekeeper to have a resource, have a backup, 1 or more nuclei hive as a backup. And that half then is serving the purpose to work in terms of colony loss. That last, going back to the last beekeeper here, rather than risking losing full-size colonies, this individual manages his bees in a single box throughout the whole year. If you lose that colony, you've lost any opportunity to make any gain. At the end of the year, we'll make up nukes, and the nukes will then be a resource to replace loss on any one of the colony. Got less invested in the resource, the nukes, and so a loss there is not as serious as a loss of the full-size colony. We can use our half as an issue to work in terms of our varroa, in terms of management. For example, pulling out cap brood if we want to use oxalic acid, where we want to reduce the amount of brood, cap brood certainly, when we use it and as a sublimation as a fumigation for a new queen. And we always need a queen, always at a time when queens are either not available or it's difficult to get a queen, or all the have already been committed. Unless you've got your order in now, for example, for a spring queen, one that's just not performing, that half colony, that nuke, can serve in that sense. As a source for drawn comb, as a source for clean honey, as a source for brood to bolster colonies. That half colony can do all that. So it's a resource that you can have either going over the winter period or being set up here in the spring or during the summer, at any of the times of the year, a resource depending on what you might then need or think you might need as a resource. And if you don't use it as a resource, can then be a colony that can be overwintered. In terms of our mite control, if we take beginning now this time of year, well, next month at least, and break down some of those big colonies and put them in smaller colonies, the colonies will grow faster, particularly if we take them down in boxes, smaller box sizes, and then they have the chance of growing. A chance of growing on ahead of developing mites and staying healthier in terms of mites. So working that, or working how you work the nuke hive in terms of your mite control. And there is an opportunity to try to, for those that are so interested, to even make up these small replacements, the nukes, and then have a resource for sale, in addition to some honey, which is difficult with a couple of backyard colonies. And pollination we're pretty much shut out of if you've only got a couple of colonies to offer for that service. So possibly to help recoup some of the costs of keeping bees if you're so interested. And this would be local sales to local members, other individuals that are interested in starting bees. So that resource, that half, then has a whole number of additional uses, additional can meet additional needs in the apiary, in addition to your production colonies or your quote standard colonies, your 2 colonies. And of course, we're saying 2.5 hives, and it's obviously not limited to 2, but there are reasons why 2 is going to be better than 1. As I look at the survey that I'm now doing, I find that people with the single hive owners have the highest losses of all of the various colony owners that we have. And in normal seasons, many seasons, those losses are 60% or more. And this loss is a loss that may occur during the active season, but is usually an overwinter loss. We know that the establishment of a new colony by either buying a package or buying a nuke, those are lost at nearly double the rate of previously overwintered colonies. So if you have an overwintered colony, survives through the season, you overwinter it again, that colony is going to survive at a rate that's twice as likely to survive at a rate than if you started the colony during a year with either a nuke or a package. And the single colony beekeepers will quit because, as we're aware, that it's a steep learning curve to learn how to keep bees, and you go through that learning curve and have no success. Repeat it by then buying a nuke or a package the next year, and having the same unfortunate lack of success. They just quit, find something else to do. In many cases, just something else to do. So how can 2 hives be different than having 1 hive? Well, I might say that by our concept, 2.5 is nothing new. You can see here our smoking, but you can see here our standard colony of a box with a comb honey super on it, and then also the resource hive. In this case, it's just simply sitting on top of the hive, often with the entrance facing the other direction, our colony entrance in one direction, it facing a different direction. The whole concept of nuke hives was popularized with Langstroth as he developed his movable frame hive. He was quite a proponent of nuke hives and overwintering nuke hives, but also using nuke hives to salvage colonies in the spring. The single brood box concept is by far nothing new and is enjoying somewhat of a renaissance these days rather than managing in 2 boxes. At one time, a number of the beekeepers had a larger, what we call the Day-Dan jumbo colony, whereas the Langstroth was a single box, and then eventually the management came to managing Langs in 2 boxes rather than as a single box management system. With my Africanized bees, I always manage them in a single box. And in many cases do not put a super on, but harvest the outer frames. So this whole concept of pick one of these, all of these, 2.5 nuke hives, single brood box, there's nothing new. It's been practiced for a long, long time. So to the concept that of 2 colonies and then the nucleus hive can reduce the loss rate. Chances are we're going to lose one of the 2 boxes. If we have a nuke or so, then that is a replacement for the colony that is lost. Or if we come through winter with a weak colony, then that nuke can be a opportunity to bolster the colony that is the weak one. Okay. We find that you need to pay a little bit more attention with 2 colonies versus the 1. And so I think as a very general statement, we can say that they tend to be more interested in bees and more dedicated if they have the investment of 2 versus the single 1. Because a lot of beekeeping is deciding the Goldilocks principle. The Goldilocks principle now in the spring is the Goldilocks and the 3 bears. Is it too weak? Is it just right? Or is it too strong? And so we need to manage each of those colonies in each of those 3 categories in quite different ways. The weak and the strong take a lot of our management time. And of course, the just right is what we'd like to have many of our colonies. So the idea that with 2 or more, it's going to be much easier to make that initial assessment, that first assessment that we made back in February. Maybe some of you just doing it now in March of, okay, is this coming out of winter a weak, or is it just right, or is it a strong colony? And then making your managements appropriate for those that be the colonies in that category. With 1 colony, it's it's going to be much tougher to try to make that assessment. With 2 or more, it's going to be easier to do that. You have that advantage of what we might call, group beekeeping. We know that colony is more than the sum of the individual parts. Well, so too with colonies. 1 colony can be very different from another one. So if you have a single colony, some of those managements that you might be able to do if you have 2 colonies are not open and not viable for you to be able to do, unless you have a beekeeping buddy that lives, down the street or close by, that you can go and share looking at his or her colonies, and then come back and look at your own colonies as in this group aspect. Many of us start out not knowing that bee buddy, and so we are trying to figure it out ourselves from YouTube, etc. Well, you're going to be faster on that learning curve with two colonies because of the advantage of this group advantage of being able to see what one is doing, what one is not doing, being able to transfer material from one to the other. So the half is then we can call that various names. We can call it a nuke. And how are we going to get that half? We can do it the simple way, and that is buy. And then when it arrives, just transfer them into a box, depending on how soon we get the nuke, in 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, and then having it expand through a box, perhaps adding a second box, etc. Or we can do it the more complicated way, the DIY, do it yourself, and you set it up yourself. And so from your one or both of your 2 colonies, you set up your resource hive. So our concept of the 2.5 then is that 2 colonies and having a resource is a faster way, in many ways an easier way, a more patterned way in terms of trying to start colonies as a backyard, as an urban beekeeper. I think at this point, yeah, let's, maybe there are some questions, some comments. The other thing that maybe is worth talking about would be to talk about the concept of why 2 versus 1. I've skipped over, I've said a few things, but perhaps there are others that people would like to relate to, that why they think 2 is a better setup than 1, or 2.5 a better setup than just standard 2 colonies. Anyone have any information they would like to join in, or questions at this point?
If you're going to start a do-it-yourself colony, do you start it entirely autonomous from the hive by just stealing some resources from it and then parking the nuke across the yard? Or is there a way of taking advantage of the heat from the mother hive to help that nuke along?
Yeah, as we know, there's no one way to try to do it. You can put it up above the existing colony. That's how you can start it, above an existing colony. You can separate it off to the side. You can leave it in the yard, or you can take it to another location if you have that luxury. There are advantages. There are pros and cons of any of those particular arrangements. And likewise, if you need your resource, if you need your half colony, there are different methods in which you can take that resource, that half colony. You can take the whole unit, or you can take individual frames. Or if it's just a queen that you need, you can take the queen, for example. If it's brood that you need, if it's a resource frame, in other words, honey and pollen mixture, you can take just it. Or you can do a unite of the whole half colony with that weak colony that, despite your feeding, despite your coaxing, still, is still weak after, the month. What we hope to see in our overwintered colonies is once we get that early bloom, we get the maple bloom, we get the alder bloom, we get that early honeysuckle bloom, the winter honeysuckle bloom, that in about 3 weeks, we see a flush of new adult bees. Weak colonies, because they are coming out of the winter, because they are weak, have a much smaller flush, have a much smaller flush of new adult bees. And so they're not as well positioned after that first 3-week period. Once pollen becomes available, they're not positioned to take advantage now of the dandelion and the plums and the cherry and the early fruit blooms, to make another great big push of a great new flux of brood hatchings coming out. So if we have overwintered a nuke, That would be a position where you could go ahead and make that union of the nuke and have a decent enough colony that then can take it much more advantage of that early pollen. So little of all of those. I'm sorry I got involved in that answer, a little bit long answer, but it'll depend on circumstances.
If you have a nuke that's parked that close to a mother hive, how small should the entrance of the nuke be? Like the size of your finger, or won't they get robbed out if the entrance is all the way across?
Yeah, so here out behind the barn, out behind the garage, our two colonies, both facing south. Our nuke is facing the opposite direction. One of our issues in setting up an early spring nuke, if we're setting this up from an overwintered colony, is that the bees, older bees will then, they new home back here, so they'll drift back here. So what we do when we set up the early season nuke is we try to shake in extra nurse age bees, and then our management for the nuke is not simply to let them go and be, but to also augment if need be with more bees. There's one other way that we can do that, and that is, as you see, we've still got a space over here with cinder blocks. We can set up our new nuke here at the original colony position, the donor colony position, and break our back and move the donor colony over to another location. So the bees from this colony know this site as home, and so they will augment the population that's in the nuke box.
Hey, Dewey, on overwintering a nuke, what's kind of the configuration of it? I'm thinking 3 frames of bees and 2 frames of honey.
Phil, a good way to do that is to take advantage of leftover bees. After we've taken honey off of the colony, those bees have nowhere to go, nothing to do. So make them up with that configuration of bees. And for the fall, if you're in an area where there is a continuing flow, you can set those up with 2 frames of brood from your stronger colonies, or 3, and then basically try to keep them within that configuration. If you are blessed with an area where there is some fall nectar coming in, you may have to super the nuke. So if you're using a 5 or 4 frame box or a 5 frame nuke box, one that you're making or buying, you add another box of the same size to put on top of it. So you could overwinter as a 2. I mean, if you're really wedded to the 2-box system, you can overwinter the nukes as 2 boxes, 2 nuke size boxes if you prefer. The configuration I like is, rather than buying the nuke box, is to use a standard box and put a divider board down the middle. And so in your standard box, you set up a nuke on one side, and with a thin piece of plywood as your divider board, you can use 5 frames on one side of a divider board, 5 frames on the other side. And so you can set up a nuke from a colony, and perhaps another week later, set up the other half of that box. And so you have, instead of a 5 frame nuke box, you have a standard size box, standard bottom covers, but with nukes on 2 sides. Depending, those early season nukes, it takes some skill to keep that early season nuke expanding. Too often, like Jerry's last question, how do you keep them from getting weaker after you set them up? So if you have them side by side, and you get one side being a dink, then at some point you just pull that divider board, and instead of 2 nukes with a divider board, you have one standard size box with a smaller colony in it. And so you're nuking that box. And more seasons than not, particularly the early ones you set up, when you set up that box with the divider board, one side doesn't seem to get going, but the other side hopefully will, and then you can augment it with what's left of the bees in the side that just wasn't getting going. That makes sense, Phil?
Yeah, that makes sense. So that your adapter plate that you, as Johnny Cash would say, that you got on top of that, is that just a bottom board with some rails put on it, or is that something that you made up, or is it?
So the adapter plate here is this could be a double screen, so that I'm using the heat from below as an advantage of getting that nuke going, with just plywood adapters on either side of it to close off, because this is a 4 or 5 frame box versus a 8 or 10 frame box. So just to close it off, or it could simply be, at this point, I'm trying to do a union of the two. So I have put newspaper between the two, and then I don't want to leave the sides of this box open. So I have this adapter board, yes. I actually think in this case, I've got a double screen here. So I'm using the heat to come up from below to be an added bonus for this this nuke box on top, as I believe in that photo. This is from Larry Connor, but.
Oh, okay.
If that's a double screen board and you have the nuke on top and you put frames with eggs and larvae in the top, will they make a queen above the double screen?
Yes, they will.
Reliably, 100%, 90%?
Reliably,
Okay.
yes.
Good to know.
Or the other thing that you made, well, I'm going to go on and talk about setting up your nukes, but the other configuration this could also be would be, this was initially a starter box. So this was a queenless box up on top, and they started queen cells here. And then I took the double screen out and put simple queen excluder between. So bees are coming and going from both, but they're raising queen cells up above, and whereas there's a queen down below.
So a queen cell factory.
What we call a finisher colony, a cell finisher. Yes. The effort, you couldn't get away with a queen excluder to start colonies, queens, reliably start queen cells up above. They will, but not reliably. So you get the cells started. It only takes a day, and once cells are started, they are reluctant to break them back down. All right, let me go on and talk about, I didn't know.
Can I just
Sure,
go
go
back
ahead,
for a
Sue,
question?
please.
They won't if something is wrong with the queen below, like she's a little old, or, you know, will they turn her over for the cells up above?
Not likely.
But would there be communication about those cells above and the queen below?
With a double screen, no.
No, I mean, once you put the queen excluder in to sort of finish those cells up.
Yes, there'll be communication because the bees can go back and forth. However, the issue is with, how bees recognize their queen. And so she is still the queen. And even though she might be a failing queen, if there is enough of a supporting cast for her that she's getting the feedback of her own pheromones, she doesn't go and start her replacements. So just because we have replacement queen cells up above doesn't mean she's not in control of that portion down below. So that's not an easy requeening method by any means, no.
No, I thought it might be an accidental or, an oversight perhaps.
We can never say never with bees. And yes, it could, but not reliably, no. All right, so let's go on to DIY, the more complex part of making your resource hive. I thought of a couple directions to go here tonight. I thought maybe talk about the management of what we do with the strong hives and what we do with the weak hives. But I think I settled on, if I got the right slides in here, settled on more how to do the half rather than what to do with the twos. Okay. You've had a lot of discussion in terms of management with your other speakers, various speakers. So I thought I'd focus a little bit on the halves, because we're at the point where we can really start reliably making the halves now. Okay. So that half, again, all these names mean different things, but they're all the same thing. That half can be a nuke, and that typically is in a different configured size box. It could be a nuke that is for mating, and that typically is in even a smaller sized box or a mini, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a divide of an existing colony or a splitting of a colony. Dividing implies that you're doing this with some sort of finesse. Splitting perhaps less finesse. You're just making a more rough split. And the concept of resource is that we're making this half size box, this nuke, divide, split, because we might want to use it at some point during the year as a resource. Okay. And so the whole concept of a nuke, nucleus hive, it's a small but fully functional working colony, usually in a small hive configuration. And small hive configurations are useful when we set these up, because bees do have a sense of space, and often these will do better if they are put in smaller space boxes, or within a box with a smaller space, such as a divider board, simply because of their whole concept in terms of space. So they're fully functional. We might be feeding them sugar water or water, any number of ways of doing that. We can add boxes to them, so we can have a 2-box system. We can super them, or we can, depending on what we need the resource for, set some up just with the intention that they're only going to get a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, and then we're going to cannibalize them. We're going to take advantage of them. So that's going a little bit further than just making the nuke, but that's using it as a resource. So once again, why we want more hives, sustainable beekeeping, rather than the model of buying nukes and or packages every year to replace our losses. We're doing this in a more sustainable way by utilizing our existing colony or colonies. We might want to do a split because colonies are becoming too crowded. We're going to come up very shortly here in terms of those strong colonies of what in the world are we going to do with them. If we decide to do nothing, we may see swarming behavior. We may see years like we had last year where it started early and just continued. I heard just a couple of days ago of an individual that had 5 swarms from one colony. One single colony swarmed 5 times in succession. Just unbelievable. We had a tremendous swarming year last year. And of course, our biggie these days, we've got to do something about varroa mite. We've got to start early. It's much earlier. If we let the mites get ahead with their reproduction, we're playing catch up and often are behind. And so we need to start with our varroa mite management early in the season. If you're all very familiar with Randy, of course, and his model, and as he demonstrates with his model, if you don't start mite control in colonies in May, you may not be able to do anything in August that'll be very effective. So we can use our splits in terms of our varroa mite management, and particularly the brood break, and particularly also in the existing colonies, of drone trapping. So we can use the nuke in our colony together in terms of our management. We can take all of our, or the vast majority of our cat brood over to a nuke colony, and then go ahead and treat with oxalic acid vaporization. The main colony, OAV, is not very hard on open brood. Dribble is harder, but not the OAV. So you can manage to get the most of the cat brood out for a period of time, do the treatment. The treatment disappears very quickly, and so move it right back in. So this could be done even within a day's period of time, or today, and then finished up tomorrow. So a number of different reasons why we want that resource, and for your management, it may vary. Oh, I was going to stop at that point for questions, but let me go on then, because you had some questions. So when are we going to make up the nuke? Well, right now we're coming up on our first day of spring, our vernal equinox, and as we know, up until the summer solstice, we have these conditions: increasing forage, light, temperature, drone flights, drone production, the availability of mated queens, some very early now. You have to have your order in earlier, an expanding colony, and colonies that are willing to do wax production. Following that summer solstice, not immediately in June, but by early July, things have changed in the colony. And up until roughly August, we're going to have declining forage, light, decreasing amount of drone flights, decreasing drone production, et cetera, and then leading on up until our predation by robbing bees, yellow jackets, et cetera. So we can do a lot more up in this coming period because of all of these conditions than we are able to do later on. Now, this does not mean that we can't make up nukes later on the year. We can, but some of the conditions on which we might want to do so are going to be a little bit more difficult. And just as with time of day, as once it warms up, we can often do some of this before even going to work. There are a couple of beekeepers I know that'll get up at 5 and do their bee management before starting their work day. This is a great time to be working with bees, or do it later as well during the time of day. So when you make up the nuke, again, it can be done at any time during the year, any time during the day. But for beginners and those that are having perhaps some difficulty in trying to do it, think of these two parts of the season and of the day as more favorable. Spring nukes, or making up those splits divide, are thought to be really related to swarming. So that would be our issue that we would think of in terms of making our nukes in the spring. But post-harvest, after we take these boxes off and harvest them, that is also a time to make up nukes, because all of those bees that are now in these 5 boxes have nothing to do after we've gone ahead and taken the harvest off. And there are a lot of bees in the colony. Often there is a tremendous amount of brood that's available in the colony. And we can then go ahead and use those bees that have nothing to do, and we can make up nukes. On a larger scale, they will actually put this extracted supers back on the colonies to clean them up, to dry them out from all the stickiness. And then they will take those supers off and shake them into shaker boxes, and bring shaker boxes into up 20 pounds or so of adult bees into a cool area, a dark area. Let all those bees mingle and mix, and then they will actually make up nukes by scooping bees out of these 20-pound boxes. And these are all bees that have, nothing more left to do. So they'll make up their nukes with leftover bees in the year. Whereas in our spring with swarming, what we're doing is often making up our nukes, that half colony, with bees that are well into a mode where they want to do colony reproduction, wanting here in the sense of the impulse of swarming. So different reasons for really thinking that, oh, here is how we can make up a resource that we can use at other times and not necessarily have a great effect on our management or our reason for our objective of keeping bees. Through your swarm line, your helpline with the association there, this is a look at swarming for the last 4 years. The blue line here, 2020, goes to 0 here because it had quit at, I think, 33 weeks.
I'm missing this bee video.
Question? Was that a question? No? Okay. So you can see January 1st, week 10 is when things start picking up. Last year in week 10, there were 6 swarms reported in your association. And you can see last year was a really darn good year for you as well as for us in terms of swarms. And by week 20, most of that has cut off. So we're looking at right now, we're in our 10th week. Are we 10th week? 10th or 11th week right now. I do not know if you've had swarms yet. In the Portland area, we did have 3 March swarms. So through week 12, we did have 3, but you're further south. So it would not be unusual that by week 13, you will have had reported to the swarm hotline a dozen or more swarms. And certainly last year that was the case. Now in some years, the other 3 years here, you see it really did not start picking up until about the end of March. So we're looking at April and May and into June. So this is when we would think of, okay, this is what the bees, quote, want to do. Now, what can I do management wise to take advantage of what they want to do something for me and my management? And so here's where my half hive comes in. Here's where I can do my splits, make up my divides. Understand the idea, the concept?
Yeah, basically going with the flow, right?
Going with the flow. Yeah. We butt our heads against the wall enough with bees. It's easier to go with them than against them. Yep. All right. So go ahead.
We have had 18 swarms called into the swarm hotline so far, about 22 counting other swarms that our members have reported to us.
So you're off to a flying start this year.
We are.
Yes, you are. We have not had one here. We had one March 5th last year. We've not had one here, but.
And I already got one in a swarm trap already. So.
And one in one of your traps, Phil. Nice, very nice.
I got 2 down in San Jose.
Oh, good, Rebecca.
Yeah. Okay, a couple of things that need to be answered here in terms of your objective in keeping bees and how you want to try to do that. One is the queen and one is the harvest. How are you going to affect harvest? So let's look at source of queens to set up those nukes. Where are our queens going to come from? One of the sources is as queen cells, because as we know, when colonies are starting to swarm, they'll not put all their eggs in one basket. They'll raise a whole bunch of swarm cells. So here circled in blue, 1, 2, 3 over here on the side, 4 swarm cells showing just on this side of this natural comb frame. They do not need that many, and so that can be a source of our queen cells. Now, when we make a nuke that with the bees rearing queens, the bees themselves rearing queens, we have to be able to know that colonies are producing drones at least we're seeing the purple-eyed stage of drones. Better seeing drones, adult drones now emerging in colonies if we've got queen cells at this point. It's going to take the drones longer to mature to mate than it will take the new virgin queens. So swarm cells, to be able to harvest the swarm cells. You not have to wait until local mating season begins, and you're basically stealing the swarm cells from your donor hive. But in some cases, these donor hives will have 15, 20 of them. So the one requisite is you have to be able to harvest them. These two are very close, and whether you could harvest these two cells and keep them intact without damaging the cell to be able to use them as a donor queen cell. This one, separate one, this one up here, separate one, would be very easy to harvest. Harvest them not at the cell, try not to do any handling of the cell. Harvest comb up and above, and you would put your fingers and use as a buffer above, so that you're not cutting. These cut very nicely from natural comb. You can cut from plastic. It's a little bit more difficult, but you in no way want to do any damage if you're going to use this donor as a swarm cell. Well, that's one method. The other is to injure the queen or remove her for a period of time and have the colony start emergency cells. So emergency cells, the big difference is the base of the emergency cell is not a cup. It was a horizontal worker cell. So they then modify that and then draw these down by a process that we call reverse queen rearing. You can actually influence where these cells are built by taking your hive tool at a time when these cells have eggs in them or just very young larvae, stage you can hardly see, and then taking your hive tool and indenting or taking these comb cells out below it. So you have an indentation in the comb just below where there are potential cells that would then be much easier for the bees to modify into the vertically oriented queen cells. And finally, for those with deeper pockets, to purchase queens. So not all of these have their pros and their cons, but basically to make up a new colony, you're going to have to find a source of a queen. So it can depend on time of year how you do this. For example, if you're making up those fall colonies and your flow is done and there's sort of a continuing flow, let the bees do the job themselves. If you're doing this early in spring, give the bees the head start by harvesting swarm cells from those very strong colonies or setting up emergency. One of the nice things you can do with emergency is if you've got several colonies and you think one is just outstanding, oh, I want more queens from this one, you can force that colony, help force that colony to make their emergency queen cells on a frame of that queen by doing this indenting underneath the reverse queen rearing. And of course, if you've got to have it like almost right away, I'm going to need this pretty soon within a week, you can't go through this more lengthy process. You've got to have a queen that pops into the colony. So source of the queen. The other question that I mentioned that is related to all of this, as you make up your nuke colony now, particularly in the spring, do you want to interfere with a honey harvest? Because as bees do any of this, swarm preparations, have to rear emergency cells, you have to take stuff away to set up a nuke with a brand new queen. That is going to affect the donor colony. Now, you can do it early enough so it doesn't affect the donor colony, or just before the nectar flow that it doesn't affect the donor colony as much. But if you need those two colonies to produce honey, you're going to have to decide, can I sacrifice one for honey harvest and only keep one? Or Do I need honey harvest from both? And that's going to dictate when you make up your half colony. Okay, I'm going to go through a few ways that we can try to do this. One of the issues always is there are probably 100 ways to make up a divide, to split a colony. Conservatively 100, like there are about 100 ways to try to control a colony that might be leading towards swarming. So I'm going to obviously skip across some things, but try to lump some things together. For many of us starting beekeepers, the easiest way to make up the nuke is simply to split a colony. So if you've got that strong colony, their brood areas in 2 boxes is shown in red here. You simply take 1 box away and put it on a new bottom board, put a new cover on it, reduce this box down to a single box. You have walked away with a split. You basically just divided the box. Some ways to help improve: do it early AM. When you put the split in the same apiary, switch its entry position. Some say 180 degrees, others, if you just do it 15 degrees, instead of all going directly south, make this one southeast, perhaps, the split. Of course, add the lid blocks. Feed syrup to both units, or the one that is the weaker, certainly, but both as well. And because you do not know where the queen is, this is the simplest way. It doesn't involve any of the skills that you need to find a queen. When you make the split, the queen is going to be in 1 box, and the other box will be without a queen. Okay. So what you can do with that box without the queen, let's just say right now that when we did the day and hour that we did the split, the queen was in the lower box. So we got a queen here in the lower box. We walked away with the top box. So that part was queenless. So what we can do is come back and check 3 days later. And if we have the skill of looking for eggs, we can find which of the 2 boxes has eggs, and then determine, well, the other one that doesn't have eggs is the one that doesn't have the queen. And so then you can go ahead and requeen that part that didn't have the queen. You can use a queen, cage queen, cage mated queen, or cage virgin queen, but you're going to have some source of those, have purchased those, or a queen cell. And that queen cell can come from another colony, another donor colony, or you simply let that part that is without the queen raise their own queen. Lots of different options that you might have. The part that has the queen will then grow quickly. You may need to add another box on this fairly quickly. The part without the queen, of course, is now going to be set back. But that's the part that can also then be treated for mites. Once you get that, you're down the road 18 days. At 18th to 19th day, you will not have any cap brood in this part that's raising the queen, and you can use your oxalic acid on that particular colony at that particular time. So a number of different options that sort of improve the just walking away with half of splitting a very strong box. Will that strong box, now that it's split, not swarm? Not necessarily. It may, but you certainly set it back, and that might be a good objective to work in terms of swarm control. This colony that must rear its own queen may not give you any production this year. If you do have the queen, the cage queen, that colony can get the flush of new bees and can be a productive colony. So depends how soon ahead of you might do for honey production. But often with 2 colonies in backyard, we're not really too concerned with honey production. We just want a little bit for the house. Okay. You can do this walk away into a nuke box. So here's our very strong colony. They're sort of an 8-framer. They're piling out from the sides of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove 3 frames early in the year, 2 frames a little bit later, or even a single frame later. and take them and put them in our nuke box, in our smaller box. Or this is a standard box. If we don't want to make this box or buy this box, make this box so that it is a standard box with a divider in between. So we'll take our 2 frames or our 3 frames, so the red is brood, and then they need a support frame. So here's our support frames, the yellow frames. We would take these frames from perhaps where the predominance of brood is, these 3 frames here in the top, but does not have to be. We could take from frame 4, frame 6, and a frame from the lower box to make up those 3 frames. We could take mostly cap brood from this box, this source hive, and put them here in the nuke box and have then relatively little cap brood. So come back tomorrow with our oxalic vaporization to cut back on our developing mites in our source hive. We could even temporarily take, if there's more than 3 frames of cap brood, take out the additional frames of cap brood, put them temporarily in a box overnight, fumigate, and then put the cap frames right back into the source hive. So using this in mite management. So this works very well in terms of treating those mite buildup starting in May. Works as a good source. Okay, and with the walk away, we can, last illustration I showed you walking away with them, putting this on another place in the same apiary or a different apiary. Now we don't have to walk very far. We can put our adapter board on and put our nuke that we just made up above the existing colony with our 2 boxes, and with a double screen between, and our 3 frames with our 2 support frames there on top. Okay. Now, how are we going to be sure that mom queen stays with the source hive? This is where some of the skill of finding queens come in, and so there's a little bit more skill if you're going to do this type of a thing versus just split and let the bees requeen a part that doesn't have the queen. But there's another way we can do this. I'm sorry, let me show you then the basics of making up a nuke. So here we're making up a nuke that has 2 frames of brood. We have a frame of open or sealed brood and a frame of open or sealed brood, or the mix of the 2. If we have our druthers, 1 frame should be mostly sealed brood, the other frame should be open or mostly sealed brood. If we're going to use it to rear queens, we've got to have the open brood. In other words, if they're going to do the emergency queen, they've got to have the resource, the eggs or very young larvae. That would be our open brood. And in this case, we're setting them also up with 2 support frames. So the outer frame here, honey and nectar, and the pollen here being bee bread, not pollen, but bee bread and honey mixture. And since this is a 5-frame box, we want some expansion to occur as this sealed brood hatches. And then we're going to go ahead and put in a drawn comb, if we have it, or a foundation frame to make up our 5th frame. Now, as I say, this does not have to be in a nuke box. This can be in a standard box. You then put a divider board here, and on the other half can be empty, or you can set up another nuke on the other half. So how you set this up, this is a 2-framer. Question is, when do you want to use your resource? How soon do you think you're going to need your resource? If it's not going to be for a while, or you're just trying to cut down that colony from swarming by taking nukes away from it, letting them rear their own queen, then these are going to be colonies that will have a brand new queen that you're planning to overwinter. So let them rear their own queen. But if you're going to perhaps need this resource hive in a week or 2 weeks, then you've got to put a queen in here as a cage queen. If you don't think you're going to need them for at least the next 3 weeks, a queen cell in here will suffice just as well. And as I indicated, you can do this with 1 frame, 2 frames, or 3 frames of brood. So if we added a 3rd frame, we would take out this drawn comb, this empty comb, and that's where the 3rd frame would go, roughly in the middle. and then 1 to 2 support frames. If you're making up if you have 4 frame boxes, you might only use 1 support frame. Shake extra bees, and we're talking about nurse age bees. So we would want to shake off of frames that where the queen is not, but has brood, and then feed. Okay, these are newer, delicate colonies, so we've got to feed sugar syrup. They can handle the syrup at this point, so it would not be a heavy syrup. It would be a 1-to-1 syrup, or 1 part sugar to 2 parts water, to make your sugar. If sugar prices are up, you want your sugar to go further. Mix it more water, a little bit less sugar. So that's the basics of setting up that nuke here in the spring, or as well in the fall. In the fall, it's very easy to find your 2 support frames. And now, instead of shaking young bees in, we're going to use the bees that are left over after honey production. So many of them will be older, but they will still do a job. In the fall, we would not want to put foundation in, because the bees just won't play that game for us. They won't want to draw foundation in the fall of the year. So that involves the skill of not transferring the queen over into our split. So let's look at another method, number of different names, shaking bee split. In this case, you've got your 2 boxes, okay, your strong colony. You're concerned in terms of swarming. So what you do is you take 1 box off, set it temporarily on just a holder here, and then take out every individual frame and shake the bees back into the box. Okay, so you're going to shake every last bee, or virtually every last bee, off of here back in the lower box. Well, now we know the queen's in the lower box, because if she wasn't when we took this walk off with this top box, we've shaken her back in. Some people like to do the shaking with a box around here, so that you get less flight going on as you do this, any number of ways. So now you have brood, exposed brood, but no adult bees. So now you put it back together. After the 20 minutes it takes you to do all that shaking, you put it back together and you put a queen exuder in between. The bees all are crowded down here. This is where the queen is, down below. So this source hive reassembled with the queen exuder. Now the worker bees, the nurse age bees particularly, are going to walk through the queen exuder to join and take care of the brood that's now up above. So now you didn't have to search for the queen, you know where she is, you know she's in the box. So now you just walk away with the top box. You take that top box and walk away with it, because you know where your queen is. And you take this and you set up that as your 1 or 2 nukes, depending how strong it is. Now, we will do this with any number of alternative ways. We can do this also with a double screen. So after we shake the bees into the lower box, we can put a queen exuder on and then replace it with a double screen, so that the bees raise a queen up above. This is basically the same basis for using a cloak board, because the cloak board is just an instrument that has a queen exuder and a solid piece of wood or tin or cardboard with it. And you put initially you shake all the bees down into the lower box, and then you put the portion that has just the queen exuder on for a day. The worker bees come up. Then you put the closure board, the tin or the metal or the cardboard, in between. And so your box on top now is without a queen, because she would have been shaken down below. And what we do is so that we take advantage of flight in the box on top, at the time when you shake all the bees into the lower box, you end up turning it 180 degrees. So it was entered this way, now the entrance is the back way. And in your cloak board, you're going to have the entrance coming 180 degrees, the former entrance location. So all the bees that fly out from the back, from all the bees that you shook out, will fly off, but some of those foragers will come back. They'll see this configuration and say, oh, and then walk into the top box because there's your entrance, rather than going around to the back where they flew out of. So in this way, you then have nurse bees that have come up through the excluder, and you have supplemental bees, forager bees. So a cloak board is a nice alternative for the shaking bee method. So again, depends on your abilities for queen, look, whatever. If you just do the shake bees after one day with the queen excluder, then you can walk away. You can do your split, remove the top box or not. You can take and replace that with a double screen, leave it right in place up on top, and have them raise a queen. That's going to have an entrance up on top, and that's the cloak board will do the same thing. Requeen the split with a mated queen or a capped queen cell. Let the bees rear their own queen above that double screen. Okay. They will above the excluder. Sue asked the question, but not always. They will, sometimes they will not, they'll tear those cells back down. Okay. You can feed both boxes, at least the box that you're trying to requeen. And so that's why we put it up on top, because feeding on top is just so much easier than an internal feeder. Okay. Switching the hive positions as the cloak board does, or when you remove the box on top, where all the bees have walked through the excluder, take mother colony, the source colony, move it to another location, and put your new split at the original source location. They say I apologize a little bit for offering some of all these alternatives, but in part, there's no one way to do it. There are a number of good ways to try to do it.
I have a question.
Yes, Robert.
Yeah, I've seen it done with using a solid bottom board, the cloak board method, but just instead of having one entrance, have two entrances and blocking one, and then taking that entrance reducer and moving it from the front to the back, or vice versa, without turning everything around. Does that make any?
Yeah. Excellent idea, Rob. And this one, I'm showing the double screen as having two openings, two corner openings.
Yes.
So you could orient this with if your entrance for source hive is this way, you could you do your double screen going to the other side. And this also works with a truly complicated system that if you really want to get yourself totally confused, is read the book by Snellgrove, Robert Snellgrove, Snelgrove. And this is called a Snellgrove board. And you not only have entrances at the back, but you have entrances on all four sides. And you chase yourself around opening and closing entrances as you go around. It's a hoop. But the system works. At least it worked for him and what's that?
I have two of those.
You have two of them. Aren't they fun?
Yeah.
Yeah. They're basically a double screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So why the half then? How do you prefer your colony reproduction? Do you want the bees to do it naturally, so you chase the bees into the tree? Or having listened to Phil a couple months ago, we put our bait hive in this apple tree, and the bees hopefully will go to the bait hive. Or do we do it ourselves? So how proactive do you want to be about colony reproduction? Because most colonies will do this. Most colonies will at least start on the way towards reproduction. Not all will swarm. Some will swarm 5 times. And sort of we got everything in between. So how proactively do you want to handle colony reproduction? Proactive way is you make up your nukes. So you keep the colonies out of your colonies out of the trees. You capture the swarm of beekeepers that aren't not listening to this tonight, that let their colonies swarm the natural way, and still capture your swarms and still have that fun and attract those crowds and get in the newspaper articles and all the other things that swarms can be so much fun. But in your own 2 colonies, your two colony apiary, you do it proactively. You do the reproduction yourself assisting the bees with reproduction. Now, with something so complicated, we're never going to cut it to zero, but we can cut it down. So much of the splitting is done relative to swarming. We can do this in a number of ways. When we see developing queen cells in our source hive, we can take frames out. We take the frames out and make them in our splits. We can put them in our nuke boxes. We can take more than 3 frames out. We can take frames from the top and from the bottom. And what we're basically going to do as our transfer is those frames that have the developing swarm cells on. Down here, most of them down here at this interface down here, use those as the frames that we put in the split. So transfer without killing any of the cells. You're probably going to crush a couple or so, but transfer most of the developing queen cells out of source hive into your split colonies, into your nuke boxes. So you're using the cells and not a cage queen, and also the brood that develops from it. So skillfully, you're cutting source colony back, stopping it on its trajectory of rearing queens, and starting your half colonies from that. Now, one of the things that newbies will say, but well, gee, I've got two of these splits already. I can't have 4, now 5, now 6 colonies in my backyard. What am I going to do? Well, again, you can put them on top above double screens, or this is a temporary condition. You have made nukes to stop source colony from swarming, made up a resource, and then if you don't use the resource, you put it back together later on. Okay? If you don't do anything, you're likely to lose that swarm to the trees. So you're taking your half colony, your resource, as a way of trying to stop that colony from swarming. The indicated swarm cells are framed from the top. Here we're taking 2 from the top and 2 from the bottom. So we're likely going to make up 2 new resource colonies with 2 frames each. Because by the time we get into swarming, we're getting a lot of brood coming off, adult bees coming off very quickly. We have a lot of bees. A lot of bees that can go into our resource colonies and still leave lots of bees in the original colony. If we're after that honey or pollination service, we want to keep the source hive from getting too weak, but stopping it from swarming. And so we're making the resource is our way to take the pressure off our established colony, so it still does what we want it to do, but not swarm, that we actually manage it.
But Dewey,
yes, go ahead.
But isn't it so that if the hive has made its mind up that it's going to swarm, they're just going to make another cell. The minute you pull out the frames with cells, they're going to, load that gun again because they want to go.
Correct. So what a good observation as well. Yes. So what we are attempting to do is we are attempting to delay swarming and have the bees replace queen in the source colony by supersedure. We're trying to get our source colony to the nectar flow, and then they quit swarming. Or, depending on what you have for a flow, getting it to July 4th, past the summer equinox. Remember that graph I showed of when colonies swarm? So you're doing this during the weeks. Now, do you have to go back in and redo this? To your point, yes. If you do it just once, like you put just 1 super on and that's it, forget about any more supers, forget about checking, see if the bees are in a super, it's not one and done. And this is the same here. So you might end up with 6 or 7 resource colonies if you've got a strong colony that has a older queen. Okay. If you let these colonies then grow out, next season they will have that younger queen, and you will have less swarming the next season. If this is a queen that's now started her 3rd year, you can almost take it to the bank and bet on it, that it's going to try to swarm. New queens, greatly reduced amount of preparation for swarming. So what you're basically doing by taking resources out, you can use the resources, you can then prepare them for colonies for the next year, or since you don't want 10 colonies now in your backyard, add them back together as a preparation for wintering. But I would say save a couple of them and try to overwinter a couple of nukes in addition to your couple of colonies. Build your condo unit.
Hey, Dewey,
Yeah,
when you set up that destination nuke, you said pull most of the swarm cells out of the source hive. If you leave any in there, won't they still swarm?
there's a possibility, great observation. There's a possibility, but a greatly reduced possibility because this is now queenless.
Yeah, but the source hive might swarm, won't it?
Well, I mean, you've got to weaken the source hive enough so that it doesn't swarm, and there's no magic to it. The swarm cells that you don't pull out of the source colony, you have to kill the rest of those cells.
Oh, so you do have to kill them.
I'm sorry, in that colony, yes.
Okay.
For security, you really do need to still, yes.
So in the destination hive, you could have multiple queen cells, and would they could do multiple swarms out of that then, right?
They could, but they're queenless.
Right.
And the chance of their doing that is reduced.
Okay. So, but you could have multiple queens hatch?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it likely that they won't produce multiple swarms just because it's a small, weak colony?
It's a smaller, weaker colony, so the chance of their swarming is very, very reduced. You can have multiple queens hatch, but typically the first queen out will start the method of destroying her developing sisters. You may get some queen fighting, but generally, because it's a smaller, weaker unit now, generally these destination nukes won't swarm. Now,
So,
they don't read the same books, of course.
so when you do that, so when you move the frames over that had the queen cells on them, what is the maximum number that you'd want over there? Because like you could have 3 queen cells. You could have, I literally just did this 2 weeks ago. I had a huge booming hive that had like 20 queen cells, and I broke it into I started 4 nukes off of it. It was crazy. And I wasn't sure how many queen cells to put in each one. I think I went for like 2 to 3 per nuke.
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable. The issue is we can't tell which queen cells would be the potential best queen.
Exactly.
So,
I was worried if I'd bumped one or something. I didn't
Yeah.
want to just put 1 in there. So
You don't want to put one in there.
7.
Right.
I didn't want
You-
7 either, because then I was afraid that I'd
Right,
just have a huge queen war going on.
right. So one rule of thumb people will use it, they'll get rid of the tiny cells, and they'll get rid of the big gross cells, very seemingly too big cells, large cells, and leave a few.
Well, I'm going to pop in there
But not
next week
one.
and see what's happened. I don't,
Yeah.
I've been trying not to peek for the last 2 weeks
Yeah.
or so. So maybe next week I'm going to peek, see what happened.
The one nice thing here of the source hive of being a nuke is in addition to it being a weaker colony, they are in a different configuration. So they treat this differently than if they're in the large one. And then, of course, the other thing is, I mean, if you've got 4 colonies, you're now maybe up to 12 with these resource colonies around, particularly if you've got 2 or 3 of those 4 colonies that overwintered were strong. So now you can start regrouping your investment by selling to these nukes to other people. They'll do just as well as the nukes that come from commercial. Well, no, not just as well, but I mean, you know, you gets what you pay for. Finally, just to finish up, this aspect of making up the fall nuke. So you got these colonies that are now queen right sitting around in your yard that you made up, but you didn't use them as a resource. Well, now what do you do with them? Now you can go ahead and try to get them through winter, because they're the ones with the new queen. That source colony that just gave you good honey production, you need to kill the queen in that colony. Yes, you heard me right. You're going to kill the queen that gave you all the production, because next year, the chance of her swarming is that much greater compared to the new queens that you made up. So now you evaluate your resource colonies, and now you make up your colonies to go through winter. And one of the ways you can do is bring your resource back to your original colony, kill the queen in your original source colony, and unite your resource on top. Why? The resource is a new queen. Okay, so you're making up your colonies in the fall, or you make up nukes to overwinter. So here's one way that you can do that. Your established colony, the one that gave you all that honey production, lots of bees, double screen, and then 2 nukes above it in one box. In this case, this is showing one box. That earlier photo I showed you, the red boxes, they were actually nuke boxes. I actually prefer this because what's going to happen is exactly as you see here, that little piece of plywood in here is going to help heat one side with the other, and the heat from the bottom box going up. And so you're going to have a better chance of these 2 nukes above surviving winter. And in your bottom box, you have your colony. Next spring, if this bottom box is only so-so or is weak, you simply then pull the double screen and you unite your resource. So you made up a resource in the fall, but you use it the first thing in the spring if you want to want to get back to a normal configuration. And if one side doesn't survive the winter, but the other side does, your resource hive, you can pull the divider as that resource hive fills up the one side and let them use the whole box. So that's a whole box with a divider board in the middle, rather than separate new boxes. Has something to say for it, but it's not the end all and do all. It's a system that you feel comfortable using. Phew. I don't know if all of you followed the bouncing ball with all of that. A lot of information, and I hope I didn't confuse you with too many variations, but I cut out the other 200 variations that we could do with all of this as we're trying to make up this resource hive. I hope you see why for starting beekeepers, for backyard beekeepers, 2.5 might make some sense. If you don't use the half, you can combine it. You can use it as a source colony for you starting next year. Depends when you want to use the resource or when you need to use the resource. I will say that most commercial beekeepers, in addition to having queens in their pocket, caged queens in their pocket, have resource hives. So on the truck, when they go out to an apiary, they're bringing feed, they're bringing extra boxes and resource hives, as well as caged queens in their pocket, because they will run colonies on pallets and they want all 4 colonies to look alike. So they are moving bees around a great deal. We learned probably early on that, well, you don't want to mix bees from this colony with that one. There's going to be fighting and all kinds of disruption, et cetera. Not so. When we get into the fall of the year, yes, the robbing and the fighting can occur, but you can do things to those spring colonies that want to expand. You can set them up on end, you can throw them up in the air, play catch with them. You can do almost any kinds of things with them. They're just a delight. And I might say one additional advantage for beginners with the half hive, colonies get intimidating for beginners. They start out as these nice boxes that you can set in the back of your car, drive all over town, and then put in your backyard. They're nice and gentle, and oh, in about 3 weeks, you're going to put them in a regular box, and gee, this is fun. I'm having a lot of fun. Then they become monsters. Well, that's the time to take and make a resource hive and learn from the resource hive. Instead of going into your monsters every Saturday, go out and just play with the half hive. Play with that resource hive. See what it is. See how much fun you can have. Get more experience. Get more practice. Don't let those big hives intimidate you. Go ahead and have all your playtime with a half hive. So one additional resource. And shameless promotion department. I had a new book out this year. I hate the title. That's the publisher title, but it's many people like to have something to get the rest of the family involved, or to help explain why it's important that they're keeping bees, and why it's important to save bees, and some of the history of bees and man. The Complete Bee Handbook is that type of a book. If you want everything that you ever didn't need to know and need something to fall asleep reading a couple pages at night, I recommend the Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping. Thank you. Let's go off that and see if we got questions. And maybe if you want to put back onto screen, we can look at each other's eating lunch and doing our whatever it is we were doing.
I do have a question. On the second to the last slide, you depict 3 colonies in 2 boxes with a divider in the top and a double screen. Are there 3 entrances to that arrangement?
So yeah, there would be 3 entrances. It's 3 separate colonies. Yeah.
Okay. In our climate, a configuration like that can work because our bees would be foraging all winter long. I don't know how that works in a climate where you have to add another box of honey just to make it survive through the winter.
Well, you know, that has been the standard, to have in the fall, have a box for bees and a food chamber, the second box. Increasingly, there are a lot of people that are using a single brood box for much of the year, expanding it only during the spring when bees are expanding colonies, going to a second brood box, sometimes to a third brood box, or to a brood box and a half, but then going back, putting a queen excluder in at some point and shutting them down, and then making them store honey up above, letting the brood hatch up above. So the nuke box, a half box, is, I agree very much with your statement. Where there's resources coming in, it's an awful lot easier to manage it. The hardest place to manage it is as you go further north, and that's because once you make up that 3-frame nuke, let's say you make it up this month or you make it up in April, those things just explode. And if you're not going to use it right away, you get very strongly expanding colonies, sometimes more strongly expanding than your overwintered colonies.
Well, I can see how that could sort of be like a 3-hive colony where you put a super on top of it and they fill it up for you very nicely. But more, I was asking the question of how do you manage in winter? Because my picture of a winter colony is a single colony in contact with a box full of honey on top, and they work their way up through the honey as the season, as the snow on the ground dictates. But if you have 3 colonies and a box of honey on top, I don't know how they work out the sharing of the honey.
So if you're overwintering those as a single box, as the condo unit, in other words, a single 5-frame colony, small colony over winter, you've got to have it expand out pretty quickly in the spring, or they will starve. The two resource frames are enough to get them through winter, but not enough to allow them to expand in spring. So those resource hives overwintered are used up usually pretty early in the spring. Those are the ones that boost the nuke. The weak ones Those are the ones that totally replace colonies that are lost over the winter.
So we cannot be lazy about doing spring maintenance and just to make sure that our bees have enough resources to make it through the brood buildup.
Good point. Yep. Yeah.
So
And,
do we,
and those are weaker colonies, so you got to get on the maintenance a little bit earlier.
I interpreted what Jerry was saying a little bit differently. I think what he was, well, maybe my interpretation was that typical winter configuration is the honey on top and you have the brood down below. If you put your double screen board on top of the honey and then you have a nuke on top of that, the nuke really doesn't have much food resources to get to, do they?
No. And if you have confined your colony down below to the single box, they too, Gregory, are limited for spring resources. So you pull them out and get them start managing them early in the season. Correct.
Okay, so they don't need much. You're assuming they don't need much food to get through the winter?
Oh no, bees don't. Bees do not need much to get through the winter. And November and December, if any of you ever had colonies on a scale hive, they lose almost no weight. November, December, they start losing the weight in January, and that ramps right up in February. And the reason being brood.
Oh, I see.
So the winter bees really don't burn through fuel very much. And it's only the investment in making more brood that really is costly in terms of honey usage.
Yes. Yep. Indeed.
Good to know.
You also need to remember, everyone, that our bees fly most of the year. So, we're in this, the 50s and 60s a lot, even in the winter. And you almost always have something to draw on.
And some resource available. So they're not just empty flight. Yeah.
Right.
As you go further north, that flight is to get the bees out of the hive that need to get out of the hive because of nosema, because of poor food stores, accumulation in the rectum of waste.
Yeah,
they need to get out.
We don't really have a cleansing flight issue here either.
In fact, we probably don't even have winter bees around here.
They're living longer, but not to dramatically, 6 months versus 6 weeks for the summer bees. Yes, but they do. I mean, we can still find in some of the studies from the Carolinas, for example, that they are putting in that fat body. They are increasing the amount of fat body, which is where they're going to get their food reserve for the winter, the glycogen that's put in there, and then the material to kick off the glands of the bees that are survivors in the spring, so that they can rear that first flush of brood.